Our program opens with an address by the Honorable Joseph C. Grew, Special Assistant to the Secretary of State, who will speak from our studios in Washington. Mr. Grew.
It was in March 1933, just a little over 10 years ago, that the Nazi government decreed that Jewish children in the schools were to sit apart from their playmates. The 1st of April in that same year was declared by the Nazis to be a day of general boycott of all German Jews. These were some of the portents of Hitler's advent to power, paralleling only too clearly the pattern of events across the world in Manchuria. From these portents, we might, if we had been wiser, have read the handwriting of death and destruction and world cataclysm on the wall of history. For as we now know, the persecution of German citizens of the Jewish faith is not merely a depraved pastime of the brutalized Nazi mob, nor is it the tragic, inevitable byproduct of total warfare. Let us be quite clear about this. The persecution and attempted extinction of the Jewish people of Europe was from the beginning and continues to be one of the carefully calculated weapons of Nazi terror and world domination. Hitler accurately recognized the Jewish people as one of the obstacles to his design for European conquest. Together with the Christian churches, the free press, the labor movement, free teaching and scientific inquiry, in short, all cultural and humanitarian forces in Germany, the Jews were among the first to have the privilege of being singled out by the Nazis as their enemies. Today, the enemies of the Nazi state are 1,000 million strong, the 1,000 million whom we call the United Nations. Of the European Jews against whom Hitler declared war in 1933, some 2 million have been deported or murdered in the past 4 years alone. Perhaps 5 million, we cannot be sure of the number, continue their residence inside the Nazi fortress of Europe. Stripped of every weapon, impoverished, starved, uprooted, and scattered among unknown prison camps, the unconquered men and women of occupied Europe are a living testament to the stamina of the human spirit. If Hitler once dreamed of a submissive Europe, that dream is shattered. So is the myth of European decadence. For Hitler's victims have proved to be tough, resourceful, and capable of reckless and sublime courage. But human endurance has its limits. Their suffering must be an incentive for haste and yet more haste. The record of the past 10 years, however, is not of suffering alone. It is also a story of courage and justifiable hope, not only in the New World, but among their European neighbors, as well as in Africa and in Asia. The Jews of Europe have been given opportunities to start a new life. To all these countries, they brought great qualities of mind and character. Consider the stark courage of men and women cutting the ties of centuries, escaping by night through mountain passes, patrolled by Nazi guards, hiding by day in fields or forests, facing constant danger of capture and death, or the heartbreak of being sent back for lack of papers and passports. With all these difficulties, thousands found their way to the friendly shores of Britain, of Palestine, of the United States, and of our sister republics of Latin America. This was made possible first and foremost by the indomitable courage of the Jewish people themselves. It was made possible, too, by the work of private organizations such as the Joint Distribution Committee, the United Palestine Appeal, and the National Refugee Service, set up and wholeheartedly supported by citizens of the democracies. More than 250,000 fugitives from Hitler have emigrated to Palestine and the New World with the aid of the Joint Distribution Committee. More than 300,000 others have been settled in Palestine through the support of the United Palestine Appeal. Of the 250,000 of all creeds who have sought haven here in the United States, a major portion have found their feet with the help of the National Refugee Service. In terms of the vast numbers of people uprooted by this world cataclysm, these figures are pitifully small, yet the work of rescue has been considerable. It has meant, first of all, vast sums of money administered in such a way as not to fall into the hands of the Nazis. It has meant wise counsel and encouragement to the weary and heartsick, their support in neutral countries until they could obtain passports and visas, their transportation to the countries of haven. It has meant also the reuniting of families torn apart by the Nazis. But this was hardly more than a beginning. There remained the task of helping them to become self-supporting and self-respecting members of their new communities. The work goes on in 50 countries all over the world, and as from the powder magazine that is Hitler's Europe, the flight continues. Every day sees the escape of men, women, and children into Soviet Russia or Spain or Switzerland. When the Nazis overran Vichy France, the refugee population of Switzerland was quickly doubled, and an equal number found their way into Spain across the Pyrenees. The work goes on, and the end is not in sight. Annihilation of whole peoples remains a deliberate weapon of Nazi conquest. The United Nations have pledged their lives and their sacred honor to defeat Hitler in that purpose. The governments of Great Britain and the United States will meet together soon in Bermuda to plan the rescue and settlement of refugee peoples in the light of the difficult problems of food and shipping. This is a United Nations task. So also is the work of human salvage, which must accompany our march into Hitler's Europe and into the Far Eastern area now under the heel of Japan, and for which purpose the President has set up the Office of Foreign Relief and Rehabilitation Operations under Governor Lehman. While governments will furnish the primary mass relief of civilians, they also will need the help of the private agencies which have been carrying this burden for the past 10 years. Food, clothing, and medicine must accompany the forces of the United Nations into Europe, not alone in the name of humanity, but for practical military purposes. When that time comes, and it may be soon, the work of the private relief organizations for whom I speak today will be ready to supplement the mass relief measures sponsored by governments. Meanwhile, their work must go on, for it is quite simply part of the winning of this war. It is also a concrete expression of the ideals for which this war is fought. The refugees from tyranny can perhaps express better than we what it means to restore a human being to dignity and decency. One of them, a great man, will speak to you in a few minutes. I am proud to share this program with him, and proud as an American of the work of the three organizations represented by the United Jewish Appeal. That this is a war fought for great affirmative principles, none of us doubts. Yet we are finding it difficult to put those principles into words that have new meaning for our time. In closing, I would like to quote to you from the writings of Thomas Jefferson, whose 200th birthday we are about to celebrate. "The flames," said Jefferson, "kindled on the 4th of July, 1776, have spread over too much of the globe to be extinguished by the feeble engines of despotism. On the contrary, they will consume these engines and all who work them." And he added, "I shall not die without a hope that light and liberty are on steady advance."
Thank you, Mr. Grew. What are some of the fundamental ideals for which the free world is striving today? Professor Albert Einstein, the world-famous scientist, will discuss this question in the talk he is about to deliver from his home in Princeton, New Jersey. Professor Einstein.
Ladies and gentlemen, our age is proud of the progress it has made in man's intellectual development. The search and striving for truth and knowledge is one of the highest of man's qualities. Though often the pride is most loudly voiced by those who strive the least. And certainly, we should take care not to make the intellect our goat. It has, of course, powerful muscles, but no personality. It cannot lead, it can only serve. And it is not fastidious in its choice of a leader. This characteristic is reflected in the qualities of its priests, the intellectuals. The intellect has a sharp eye for methods and tools, but is blind to ends and values. So it is no wonder that this fatal blindness is handed on from old to young, and today involves a whole generation. Our Jewish forebears, the prophets and the old Chinese sages understood and proclaimed that the most important factor in giving shape to our human existence is the setting up and establishment of a goal, the goal being a community of free and happy men who by constant inward endeavor strive to liberate themselves from the inheritance of antisocial and destructive instincts. In this effort, the intellect can be the most powerful aid. The fruits of intellectual efforts together with the striving itself, in cooperation with the creative activity of the artist, lend content and meaning to life. But today, the root passions of man reign our world, more unrestrained than ever before. Our Jewish people, a small minority everywhere, with no means of defending themselves by force, are exposed to the cruelest suffering, even to complete annihilation, to far greater degree than any other people in the world. The hatred raging against us is grounded in the fact that we have upheld the ideal of harmonious partnership and given it expression in word and deed among the best of our people. Exposed to a criminal, ruthless persecution, we are in ourselves aware that we serve mankind's true ideals. There can be today no higher goal for a Jew than to aid with all his power all those of his fellow Jews whom our aid can reach. The most great satisfaction I have, most greatest satisfaction I have observed that the rescue work supported by the United Jewish Appeal is excellently organized and most highly important for the salvation of our people. Help to save the body, that the spirit may continue to be effective for the highest good of mankind.
Thank you, Professor Einstein.